We are in John chapter 9. John 9 is a very good chapter to think about the whole idea behind how to interpret a dialogue. We see that in John 9 there's a whole lot of role players, and there are quite a number of different kinds of dialogue and interaction between different groups of people. So it's quite difficult in a long chapter like this, with so many role players and so many scene changes, to ask yourself and to find the answer to the question, what is the big idea? What is the theme of this passage, given that there are so many different kind of scenes and role players? So one way that you can find out what the passage is about is to try and find the source of the tension. What causes the story to become tense? And in this particular story, the narrative becomes problematic in verse 13 to 16. When the Pharisees enter the conversation, they say, and John makes the comment in verse 14 that Jesus opened the eyes of the man on the Sabbath. And then the Pharisees realize that Jesus has done all of this miracles and making the mud and so on, smearing it on, asking the guy to walk and wash himself. All of those happen on the Sabbath. So they make a claim based on their worldview and their religious framework that Jesus, whoever this man is that healed him, cannot be from God. So what causes the tension in this particular story is the identity of Jesus. Who is he? Where does he come from? So let's have a look at how this text answers that question. So the very first thing that we see is when the story begins in verse 2, is his disciples calls him a rabbi. Rabbi is someone who is educated, learned, has a holy walk in terms of the law of God. He is teaching others not only about the scriptures, but he teaches them how to live and so on. So a rabbi is of high importance in the Jewish culture, a man of influence, a man who is revered for his knowledge of the scriptures, but also for the way that he lives. And he's someone that people will go to get help from or to make sense of what is happening in the world. So the second thing that we see is that what Jesus says about himself in verse 3. He said, neither this man nor his parents sinned, but this happened so that the works of God might be displayed in him. And then he goes on to say in the next verse, as long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. So in verse 3 he says that God's work must be displayed in this blind man. And then he says he is also, God is the one who sent Jesus to do that work. He includes the disciples also in that and say, we must do the works of him who sent me. So what Jesus is claiming here is God wants to do work. He is the one sent by God to do that work. So he is obviously of God. He's from God. And that is what his next statement is saying. He's making a statement about his own identity in verse 5. He says, I am the light of the world. And this is a theme that we've seen right from the start, from John 1, where light of the world has got, or it draws it has the implication of being the light in terms of what God has done in the Old Testament, comparing that to the darkness of evil. So it says that he is the light of the world. He is from God. Down in verse 11, here becomes the testimony of the understanding of the blind man of who Jesus is. So first of all, he just calls him the man. He is just a man called Jesus has done this. And after the Pharisees came, these two understandings of Jesus changes radically, because in their mind, in their framework, in their picture of God, this man cannot be from God. So they are, if we refer back to the first couple of lines where Jesus says he was sent by God, these guys says, no, it's not possible. He is not from God. Why? Because he cannot keep the Sabbath, and therefore they declare him a sinner. And someone else looks at that and then says, well, no, how can a sinner perform such signs? The Pharisees calls him a sinner because he does not keep the Sabbath. So that is their framework. Their understanding of who God is does not have any room for a person like Jesus, who can heal someone on the Sabbath without necessarily breaking the written law. The man goes on to, as the story unfolds and the man is being interrogated, the blind man who was now healed, he moves on from saying that Jesus is just a man, and he says, well, he is a prophet. He has to be a prophet at least, because no one has ever done something like this. So he must be from God. He is a man, maybe not a sinful man, but he is definitely a prophet. And then again, the Pharisees are trying to discredit his character. They are trying to say that he is just a normal guy. And they make the statement in verse 24 to say that he is a sinner, again based on their assumption that he broke the Sabbath. Again, in verse 33, the conversation carries on. And now the blind man is arguing not just that he is a man, not just that Jesus is a prophet, but he says if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. So now he is actually maybe speaking better than he knows. Because he is now saying exactly what Jesus said about himself, that he is sent by God. And this man says, if he wasn't from God, he could have done nothing. He couldn't have opened my eyes. The last verse of this narrative, in verse 35, says again something that Jesus calls himself. It's the title that he gives himself most in the Bible when he refers to himself, the Son of Man. It's the Son of Man from Daniel chapter 7. This is not just a person, it is a divine title. And he says, do you believe in the Son of Man? So Jesus is giving himself a very divine title. And he says who that Son of Man is. He says, I am. He is the one speaking with you. Jesus is claiming to be the Son of Man. And then the man moves from to the ultimate testimony of who Jesus is. So he moved from just a man to a prophet to sent from God, and then he calls him Lord in verse 38. So his identity has grown. This man has definitely seen the light. He has seen not just daylight, but he has seen and come to understand and to believe that Jesus is Lord. Now, Lord could mean a couple of things. It could mean Mr. or Sir, or it could mean Lord as we understand it, a godlike person. And which one is it? Well, it's clear from his reaction, because he worshipped him, that he thought that he was from God. He was the Son of Man, and he is Lord, worthy of being worshipped. You will not worship someone that you just call Sir or Mr. So that is the sort of the final nail in the coffin for this guy, for this blind man, to acknowledge the identity of Jesus Christ. He is worthy to be worshipped, and there's no indication here that Jesus is trying to stop him. Jesus acknowledges his worship. Usually, not even an angel would accept worship. Later on, when John writes his book of Revelation and wants to worship the angel, he says, no, don't do that. I'm not worthy. But here, Jesus clearly accepts the worship, which is due to him, because he knew who he was. He was the Son of Man from God. He is the second person of the Trinity. The greatest identity, or the greatest proof of who Jesus was, is actually not in what people think of him, but what the narrative is saying that he did. This miracle was an eyewitness account of someone who, first of all, saw what happened, John himself and the disciples, but also of the man who has gone through this whole miracle, to whom the miracle has happened. So here we have, I think, the biggest indication of Jesus' identity is the fact that, almost by scientific proof, the Pharisees, through their interrogation, finds out that the miracle really happened. It's a fascinating miracle. It's someone who was born blind. The problems could have been many that caused his blindness, as any eye doctor will tell you. But it's over and over and over again. It is said here, and I'm going to mark it in green, that the miracle actually happened. And this man's testimony is that he was the one. Verse 7, he came home seeing, was the eyewitness account. And then when he tells the story himself in verse 11, he says, and then I could see. The miracle did happen. Verse 25 is the most beautiful testimony. I was blind, but now I see. And of course, that is on more fronts than we can see that not only did his physical eyes open, but as he acknowledges the identity of Christ, his spiritual eyes were also opened. In 9 verse 30, he says, that is remarkable. You don't know where it comes from, yet he opened my eyes. He's repeating the miracle, something that the Pharisees are blatantly trying to refute. They don't want to acknowledge what is plain to see for everyone. In verse 32, again, nobody has ever heard of opening the eyes of a man born blind. It most certainly did happen, and he was the recipient of it. We see then here, well, this is one way of interpreting it. You can see that I didn't draw any structures, no meaning blocks for this particular narrative or story or dialogue. You could do that. You can indicate which sections fit together. But sometimes if you read a passage like this, you ask yourself, what is the cause of the tension? And that oftentimes gives us an idea of, to answer this question, what is the big idea? What is the main topic of this conversation? And clearly we see that the main topic is about who the man Jesus is. Is he a sinner? Is he, and this conversation will carry on to the next chapter as it was in the previous. Sometimes they say he's demon possessed. Who is he? Finally, it is the voice of Jesus himself. His proclamation that he is sent by God, he is the Son of Man. And eventually it is also very clear that the man who received this miracle, his spiritual eyes was also opened. He testified that Jesus is a man, then he is a prophet, and then he is the Son of Man, sent from God, and then he worships him as Lord. May that be the story for us, for you who are reading and reflecting on this passage, and may that be the testimony of many, many people that hears this message, and that you are praying for, and may their spiritual eyes be opened as well to see Jesus for who he really is.